Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This episode has been sponsored by Bookhampton. As the premier independent bookstore in the Hamptons, Bookhampton has a highly curated selection of books for readers of all ages, unique one-of-a-kind gifts, and exciting author events. Browse their fabulous staff suggestions online at bookhampton.com. I'm excited to be here today with Kathy Wang. Kathy is a graduate of UC Berkeley and Harvard Business School. Kathy spent years working in the tech industry at Intel and Seagate before writing her first novel, Family Trust. She currently lives with her husband and 2 children in the Bay Area, where she's working on her second novel. Also, just a friendly reminder, please subscribe to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And it would be great if you could follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and also at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thank you so much. Welcome to Kathy.
Thanks for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. So Kathy, can you tell listeners what Family Trust is about? What made you want to write this novel and what is it about?
So Family Trust is essentially, it's kind of like a multi-generational family saga. It centers on an Asian American family, like kind of upper middle class in Silicon Valley. The patriarch gets a kind of terminal illness diagnosis, and it kind of follows the various players as they struggle with this diagnosis and what it means. So there's adult children in this and who have their own lives and their own problems. There's the first wife who kind of built up his so-called fortune with him. And then there's his younger second wife who has been with him for some time and is, finding caring for an older dying man a little bit more trouble than she had anticipated. And so that in a nutshell is the story. What made me want to write this story, this story actually just began with one of the characters whose name is Fred. He is an HBS grad who's kind of struggling with his career in Silicon Valley. And I guess for me, when I wrote this at the time, I was definitely at the stage in my career, and so were my peers, where, I think when you graduate from college, you kind of go along this very established path. You graduate from a good school and you get a good job, and then you go to a good graduate school, and then you go to a good job after that. But then all of a sudden, I think your career kind of stops for a lot of people. You stop going up. And, I think a lot of us have been told that we'll continue to go up. And then you actually realize that for a lot of us, you're not. Maybe you're just going to plateau there, or maybe you're even going to start taking a few steps down, right? And so that was something that I was going through at the time. And what really fascinated me was just how the men were handling this phenomenon versus the woman. I think they had very different ways of dealing with this disappointment. And it was just something that I was obsessed with. And so from there, I just started writing one of the characters, and then it kind of grew.
So interesting. And you deliberately put your career on hold, not sort of a stalling as you describe it for Fred, but you put your career on hold as a tech manager after your son was born, and that's how you wrote this book. Is that correct?
Yeah. My husband had this job at the time where he was probably traveling half the month. And then, we had a baby, and it was just I just couldn't figure out how to make it work, in going back to work. And so I ended up staying home, and, I definitely felt really weird about it. I was the only person in my entire section who was not working. And so you definitely feel, you definitely have feelings about it. And so, yeah, definitely.
For listeners, Kathy and I both went to the same business school, Harvard Business School, and not many people, are novelists/writers, and not many people choose to stay home with their kids. Well, actually, is that even true? I'm not even sure.
It happens later on, once they have their second, I feel like then a lot of people are just this is too, yeah. And then a lot of, mainly women, I think they kind of step away.
Yeah. But the idea of writing a book about, what happens when you're not as successful as you once thought you should be, I think is so interesting, because I've personally found now that I'm in my, in my 40s and people are sort of looking at their careers more analytically, the people who are really struggling with where they've ended up are having sort of the most difficult time of it in sort of every realm of their lives. Do you find that too?
Do you mean at home and at work?
Yeah, I feel like especially for people who have been told their whole lives that they're these achievers and to keep going, and they have great educations and they start out with great jobs, and then they sort of don't fulfill the potential that they believe they can. I don't know. I feel like it does so much to self-esteem for those people. More so than
totally. I agree with you, actually, and I think a lot of them, when I was at HBS, I think most people are not married yet, for example, and so they're like, well, I rock it at school. And so when I get married, I'm going to be great at that. And then when I have kids, I'm going to be great at that. And then, that actually happens. And, I think there's going to be failures right along the way. And I think that they have a hard time, like you say, managing that as well.
Yeah, I guess that was my long way of saying
Yeah.
people have a hard time managing failure.
No, totally. I agree. Yeah.
Although now that we've been talking, I've been thinking about different, particularly women who I was in school with, who have, after having kids, have started really creative, interesting careers, not necessarily the straightforward jobs that they had right after graduating. But
Yeah, no.
I don't know. I think, anyway, not to say that people aren't working, but anyway.
I understand.
But all to say, I think that's a great starting point for a novel, which is probably why it turned into such an amazing novel. And apparently, so you wrote this book while your son was napping in the afternoons. Is that true? I feel like I can't even get through my emails during nap time.
I mean,
not that I even.
Yes, I mean, I feel like, because that was like that one article that came out from my hometown newspaper, and it was so funny because the woman who interviewed me, I mean, she had a young child, so she was like really focused on that point too. But so it's just kind of, I mean, yeah. I mean, it was. I mean, I guess the one thing that I don't know if it comes across is I did write it when he was napping that year, but I mean, it was really fueled by a very deep sense of desperation. I mean, it was just like, I just was, I just needed to have something that was mine, that I was doing on my own. That was something that I could, like a little hobby or something. So I did do it while he was napping, but I mean, at times it was really miserable for me, right? Like he would be like, I would try to do everything while he was awake, like, like watch me wash the dishes. And then he would like have a, meltdown. And, it was definitely not that easy.
And there are lots of hobbies you can take up, right? Why this one? What was it about writing or writing a novel in particular that really appealed to you?
I mean, it's definitely like a bucket list item for me that I wanted to try to write a book. And so, I didn't know what my life would be like after I had 2 kids. Maybe I would go back to like a full-time like corporate career. So I was just like, this is maybe the last time I'll have a big chunk of time for quite a while. So that's essentially what pushed me to write it, and I think like any writer too, I'm a big reader, and it was just always something that I was interested in.
And had you written any short fiction or anything, or you just literally dove in?
I hadn't. So I hadn't had any like publications, and the thing was like, I was like, ooh, well, maybe I'll just like go to one of those programs. Stanford has a program or like a fellowship, but all of those require like letters of recommendation and examples of your writing. And I didn't have any of that. And so I was like, well, I guess, I have like almost like no choice but to just try to write like a longer piece. Yeah.
Maybe there's something to be said for the freedom, because I don't know, whatever recipe you you had for your book ended up with such success. Okay. And I don't want to quote your hometown paper again, but can you tell me a little more about the process of selling your book and how that all went down?
Yeah. So, I had just used Google for everything. So I didn't have like beta readers or anything. And I think, it's like when you have a young kid, you can't really meet up to do these like things at like 1 p.m. or something. So I had just, done the whole spreadsheet thing. I think HBS people like spreadsheets where you have the list of the agents and everything. And then once I thought my book was in kind of like a decent shape, I started sending out the query letters. And, those are essentially those letters that you cold call agents with to try to get them to be interested in your book. From there, I eventually got an agent, and then, the novel went on submission, I think pretty quickly after. I mean, she had a few kind of comments on it, but I think we turned it around in like maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then she went on submission to the publishing houses.
And how did you feel when you negotiated your final deal and the ink that had dried on the contract? Were you just over the moon, or could you believe it?
I mean, so, when I signed the contract, like, I had probably gotten, like, I had like just given birth. So I was like not sleeping. So it was almost like a non-event. I mean, it's an event, but it was just like, I was like probably sleeping like 3 hours a night, with the baby yelling and then like the toddlers acting up. And so you're just like, I mean, it was wonderful, but I almost don't remember it. It's just, in that haze of that period where you don't really remember anything from when your kids are like really young. And so one thing that I do remember is that was when I told my mom that I had written a book. Like I didn't tell her anything until I had received a contract from HarperCollins. Because I knew if like something fell through, I would forever be like reminded, like, what happened to that book you said you're going to write? So I remember when I finally got the digital contract was when I told her I had written something.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Well, let's talk about the matriarch of the family in this book, Family Trust, Linda Liang, the sort of this typical mom, except that she and her husband, or former husband Stanley, have gotten divorced. Stanley's with another sort of younger woman, and yet she's obviously still the mom to the two grown children. And when Stanley goes through an illness, she plays like a very interesting role. Like you don't see this a lot, right? What it's like for the ex-wife when the former husband / dad is ill. And that was really interesting relationship to examine. And then you made me laugh so much when Linda starts dating online with this Tiger Lily app, and she goes on a date finally with somebody she had met and says, in person, Norman looked like his photos, albeit older. When she first saw him, Linda was struck by a grim fear that she too appeared that aged and scuttled to the bathroom to reassure herself. She pet her face in the mirror. She didn't think she looked that bad. She thought she might still even be able to pull off handsome, but there was nothing she could do about it either way. She applied a fresh coat of lipstick. Right. I just love that paragraph. It's like so well written. So you just feel yourself in that moment. You're like in the bathroom with her. It's like just so perfect about aging and beauty, and it just encapsulated so much right there. So tell me more about Linda's character and how you chose to write her.
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words. Linda, I mean, I think Linda's like a very, I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, she's a, I think many Asian Americans will read this and be like, that's my mother. And that's how my mother is. She's very practical. She's not very sentimental. She's very focused. She's very results focused. She's not a hugger. She's not going to praise you. He wants the best for her kids, but it's going to come out in a much more kind of direct, blunt fashion than more maybe stereotypically American kind of cheerleading style. So that's essentially her. And, she was responsible for a lot of the financial success with her first husband. And then, they got divorced. And now she's seeing that maybe everything that she built up, which, obviously he walked away with half with, is going to go not to the adult children that, are her children and his children, but actually to his younger second wife. Something else that is just interesting to me after having published the book is, I think there's very different viewpoints, I think, on that younger second wife in Chinese culture versus American culture, I want to say. Like in Chinese culture, I mean, and I'm kind of being stereotypical here. I mean, I'm cliche stereotyping, but I think when an older man marries a younger woman, in Chinese culture, everyone's kind of like, yeah, like that's, there's a deal going on there. Everyone knows it. She wants a lifestyle and he wants, companionship from someone young and pretty. I think in American culture, it seems to be like, it needs to be about true love, or there has to be this, oh, well, it's love, money is not even in the equation. And so, when she's dealing with the discussion of his inheritance or his will, I mean, to her, it's just a normal conversation that you have. But it's just interesting because I get emails from American readers and they're like, what's wrong with her? It's just funny because with Asians, it's not even something that's a problem.
Wow. No, I was definitely surprised reading that. That was, it's like, that's bold. Yeah. Was your mom similar to Linda in how she raised you or her sort of general affect? Did you base it off of your own family at all? Or
my mom is definitely like a certain kind of, I mean, she's like my friends growing up, they called her like Asian wasp. Like she's just very, a certain way, and she's, everything has to be very proper. So she's definitely similar to Linda in some respects, and definitely, I think, in her bearing.
And how about Fred, the disillusioned business school graduate who's sort of struggling? I feel like, when you had his girlfriend, Erica, sort of stretch the truths about him, it's almost like what he wishes had happened, right? Like the things that she writes, even though he cringes when he, reads it on Twitter or whatever. I think he would be happy with the version that she has of him in her head. You know what I mean? Yeah. And how did that come about?
Fred is actually my favorite character, but he's the one that I think most people dislike the most, But he's actually, it's funny. I hear, quite a few of my ex-HBS, my friends from HBS have read it, and all the Asian guys are like, yeah, this is a normal man. Like he's normal. But so I guess he's my favorite because I feel like he's very true to life. And I wanted to write him because I don't feel like there's a lot of Asian American men that are described in fiction.
That's probably true. Yeah. Another author, Alyssa Friedland, who wrote The Intermission, spoke to my book group the other day. And she said that a lot of people had said to her about her characters, I'm not sure I like them. I'm not sure your character is very likable. And she's like, that's okay. Yeah. Like that wasn't, my goal was not to make my character somebody you want to like, that actually wasn't at all what I was going for. So that's good, so yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for, you don't have to like everyone, like just being exposed to some of these characters is fantastic in and of itself. They don't have to be somebody you want to be best friends with necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about Kate, the daughter. So Kate is like the typical nice girl, or she was, she feels she's the nice girl to so many others. And then you actually write, what did it mean to be nice? Nice was a label that had been foisted on Kate since childhood. You're great, Denny had said way back then, like actually nice, not like so many other Asian women. But then soon after, you say, it was the times that she was a bitch, Kate thought now, that she had really excelled. So I was wondering about this sort of dichotomy between the nice girl and then the bitchy sort of successful girl. Do you feel that that's a Silicon Valley, must have type of thing? Or was it just Kate herself that you found interesting as a character and wanted to portray that way without any sort of more generalized sort of societal commentary?
I think maybe it's not. I mean, certainly it's a case in Asians. I mean, I think a lot of women have this problem, right, in Silicon Valley where you have to be very, I mean, a lot of industries where you're supposed to be nice. I mean, I think banking is its own separate kind of world there where I think the women have to maybe behave a little differently. But in the Valley, I think you have to be pleasant, right? Like people want to have to work with you. And, especially when you're like in a business function and, so much of your job here is working with engineering talent and working with software and all that. I mean, they have to like you for you to get a result. And so that's so much of your job. I think being Asian American, there's a stereotype that you're very shy, you're very sweet, you're soft spoken and, but like, Asians just like, thinking like awful things all the time. I mean, and it's funny, like when a bunch of Asian people get together, like the conversation can be so mean, and like the things are said. And then, you go back into your office, with other white people maybe, and then, you're a totally different person. I think that's something that's experienced by a lot of minorities. I think where you have your real self that comes out maybe with people you're more comfortable with, and you go back into the workplace and you assume your other identity. I just think for Asian Americans, probably pigeonholed a lot, and that have to be the more nice, conciliatory type of role.
I bet some people could argue like any group of friends who's really close can get together and sort of gab and be who they really are.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have to put on, at least some sort of veneer of civility at work, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So this novel was so great and so rich in so many relationships and aspects and family and everything else. I mean, it really sort of had it all, which was fantastic. And your book deal, I guess, included 2 books. So I was wondering if you could talk at all about your next book.
The next one, and I'm sure you've heard this on from many people, it's like such a struggle. It's just like, I feel like I used up everything when I think back to my book, I'm like, man, I should have like not included this part because I just wasted it there, and I could have made it this full blown thing in the second book, and now I can't. And so, I'm still struggling a lot with it. I probably have written like 200,000 words, and like none of it's not working. So I am now trying something else, and hopefully it'll work out okay. But yeah, it's definitely a struggle to do the second. And I think my personality is that, I have the second that's due, and, it's like looming over me all the time that I need to come up with a second book.
And when you sold the second book, did you have to agree on what it was about, or can it be about anything?
I mean, there was I had no pages. So it was just literally like, I had said something and they're like, okay. But I think the directive is kind of that it can be about anything within reason. I don't know what's going to happen if I deliver like a vampire thing or something.
Well, right. Of course. No, I mean,
but hopefully it will be, hopefully they'll accept whatever I come up with. But, you see these all the time where like the first one comes out and the second one doesn't come out for like 10 years, and so I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder if that's going to be me.
Well, I feel like it's so much harder. It's one thing to write and be creative sort of in the privacy of your own home if you don't know, 100% where it's going. Mm-hmm. But it's almost like you're like standing in the middle of Times Square and every word you think of is being like broadcast out. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, right? I feel like there has to be some sort of like suspension of disbelief type of thing where you're like, well, no one's actually going to read this, so I'm just going to do it. You know what I mean? And then go back and like you have to fool yourself. I feel like you'd have to fool yourself into getting this sort of authenticity of the first book.
Yeah, completely.
I mean, that's just me. I don't know. I feel like when I know people are about to read something, I get very self-conscious about it. Whereas when I'm writing from the heart, it just like flows out of me. I don't know if you're the same way.
No, completely. I totally agree. I mean, I think that's something that's really interesting to me is like, I'm not really like a user of Twitter. Like I never used it before I wrote this book, and everyone's like, oh, you have to use Twitter because, everyone in publishing uses it. So like I'm on Twitter. I normally lurk a lot, and I'll see people like tweet, and then like the tweet will disappear. Like they decided not to do it and then they delete it. And like then, because they realize it's going to be out there. And then, and I feel like you can't write a book thinking that way. Do you know what I mean? It's like maybe that's like really good stuff probably. Or that was a controversial tweet that they did that they decided to delete. But that's the stuff that's like really good in a book. And so if you keep just freaking yourself out that, someone's going to hate it or take offense to it, I think, a lot of times it's too difficult to keep going.
I actually just finished writing this memoir, which I've now decided I can't sell. But anyway, I know it's a long story. But anyway, 3/4 of the way through, even my husband who read it can tell, he's like, this is when you realize that maybe it wasn't just you who was going to read this. Like my whole like style and my agent and everybody, they were like, okay, this is what happened here. And I'm like, I don't know. I just started panicking. Anyway, obviously my tiny little story, it pales in comparison to your like major deal with the publisher and everything. But all to say, I relate to that feeling, and I'm sure you will come out of it soon. And I also think like, for sort of type A, and I'm making assumptions about you here, but I'm assuming you're sort of more like a type A, overachiever that I can like relate to in that way. And having something not be perfect is almost unbearable, So I but creative things sometimes just end up not being that way at first, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here.
No, completely. I get emails from like HBS people who like secretly want to write like a book, and they just can't get past like the second page or whatever because they write it and then they have to read it and they're like, oh, this sucks, and then you want everything to be perfect right away. They don't understand how truly bad like the first draft is going to have to be.
Yeah. And no matter how much advice you get from other people, I mean, every author I've had on here, when I ask for advice to aspiring writers, everyone says, just write. You just have to start writing. Just do it. And yet when I try it, I'm like, oh, but I can't. Oh, but what should it be about? Oh, but wait, the jacket cut. Oh, but wait, So I don't know. I think our minds get the better of us at times, but anyway.
Completely.
So do you feel like your life has changed since the book came out? I mean, it's gotten such amazing attention from the media and, it's such a great book. How is it now that it's out there?
I mean, I think it's the same for me. Like, I mean, I live in like a suburb in Bay Area, so I'm not like in a big writing community. So, I mean, it's the same for me. Like, I'm like trapped in my house with my kids, and like I just don't like like I didn't do a book tour, for example. I'm for the listeners out there. Like these days, I think unless you're like a really major publisher, like I'm author. I don't think publishers really like fund book tours anymore, right? Things. And so, I didn't do one. So I'm just doing kind of a few events but otherwise everything's basically the same for me. There's not much that has changed. I mean, an author, like even the most famous author in the world, which I certainly am not, is still like not, it's like below a Z-list celebrity. So I feel like there's just, there's nothing that's really too different.
I know. That's the thing I like can't understand. You can walk into a room full of the most brilliant, accomplished authors and no one will even know who they are. It's insane. It's just like, it's just crazy. I feel like there should be so much more attention. That's part of why I do this podcast, is just to give writers a platform, because great books like yours might just like fall from the radar if the people don't hear about it, right? I mean, getting the word out is so important. So anyway.
No, I mean, I totally, and what's interesting, I mean, also, I hate to keep going back to like the fact that we both went to business school, but like, I feel like when I learned about how much like even very famous authors sometimes get paid, you're like, dude, like that's like a mid-level whatever at like a bank or something, like you're like the highest achieving like artistic mind is being compensated at the same level as like, I don't know, like a McKinsey
first year.
First year. And you're like, oh my gosh, like this is just I don't want to say unfair, but it's a different world.
There was a recent article that said the median salary for writers is $21,000 a year.
Yes, yeah, I saw that too.
It's like, come on.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is fair. Like,
yeah.
Is this how we value the contribution? Like, I feel like if I curl up with a good book and it amuses me for like 12 hours and makes me think and transports me to this other world, like I would pay so much more than I would even for a movie for that. I mean, think about, I don't know.
I agree. Yeah.
Life is not always fair, but
I just saw that. Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, in a bad way. But I was
crazy. No, I know. I can't believe it. You know, I also remember in some operations class at business school that I took, there was somebody who was a writer or in some way, you know, doing some sort of writing something. And I remember them saying that they viewed themselves as just a producer of any other product, but their product was words.
Okay. Yeah.
And so they approached it like, you know, they were just going to market it as if it was, you know, the latest iPhone or, you know, a new pair of shoes or whatever else. Like that the words, like that the end product was no different in a way. It's like,
so that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's basically all I learned about writing from business school. I don't know about you.
I agree.
Anyway, so now that I've talked a lot about, you know, other advice I've gotten from writers, but what advice would you have to somebody just starting out? I mean, yours is such a inspiring story that it can be done, that you can just like take a go and have it really pay off. What would you tell other people who are attempting it?
I think that my advice would be, so like just, you know, backpedaling a little bit, like I keep this like journal. It's like a 5-year journal. So every day you can look back and see how you felt a year ago on the same day and 2 years ago. And it's funny because like after I finish the book, like you forget a lot about how much work it is. But you know, when I go back and read the entries from when I was writing it, I mean, I think I felt like a failure a lot of the time. And I felt like the book was failing, that I was failing, that things weren't working out, like that there were these huge plot holes that I was not going to be able to figure out. And I think my advice would be that when you're writing your book, I think you're going to feel that level of failure and that the project can't be completed and that there's no way that this is going to be publishable. And I think my advice would just be like, you have to understand that that is a feeling that you have to have in order to move forward into a publishable product. From my perspective, you know, like it's entirely normal and it's necessary. So if you feel that way, just know that, you know, that I think that's a feeling that I think a lot of writers have. And, you know, I think a lot of writers have that feeling with every single book that they write. So it's normal, and, you know, don't feel that that is necessarily like a pronouncement on the ultimate like publishability of your work, right? It's just, it's part of the process.
Or maybe your book is just terrible.
Yeah, that's good. It could be like, I was trying to end it on it, but there is always a possibility.
But we're assuming that everybody out there is writing really great books, so that's not going to be the case.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? I just finished reading An Anonymous Girl by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. It was good. I'm interviewing them tomorrow, so it's good. It's a page turner. It's
I read their earlier one.
Yeah, I don't usually read thrillers, but it was good. I was like, why don't I usually read thrillers? So
I like, you know, thrillers. Like I mean, I think there's a huge market when like they're well written, right? Like, you know, they're just, I guess you have to have like a minimum level of readability, you know. But I mean, I think they did a great job with The Wife Between Us. Is that the one? I read it, yeah. And so I just finished A Terrible Country.
Okay, how was it?
By Keith Gesson. It was good. I mean, because I had like an interest in Russia, so I had gone there for about a month, and so it was interesting to me. And so I didn't know anything about Keith Gesson before I read it, and then I Googled him, and he's like this literati person, and so I didn't know any of that. So yeah, it was interesting. But yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me on. I think it's amazing that you do this series.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for coming on.
And please, like, I mean, I think you should try your memoir, by the way.
Oh, I think I'm going to rewrite it as a novel, and then I feel like maybe I'll have a little more freedom.
Yeah, that's always a good way to.
I just don't really know how to write fiction, but it didn't stop you, and you did a great job.
No,
so.
I think you know more than you think. I mean, given everything that you read, like how much you read, and so
yeah. You'd hope.
No.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you so much. It was really great chatting.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
This episode has been sponsored by Bookhampton, bookhampton.com. Thanks to Ryan and Steve at Texture Sound for the audio editing and mixing. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.